Welcome to the Grace Story Podcast, where inspiring stories are brought to life. This podcast is made possible by Grace College and Seminary, located on the shores of Winona Lake in the great state of Indiana. I'm your host, Dr. Drew Flam. This is the Grace Story Podcast. We are all in for a treat today. The studio is full, and I suspect by the end of this time together, your heart will be full as well. And likely you'll laugh a little bit and cried a little bit as I talk with three of my friends who all have grace connections and all in different and unique ways care about vulnerable children. So welcome to the podcast, Gary Ringer, Kondo Simfukwe, and Kearstin Criswell. Sitting to my right, Gary Ringer is the owner of Ringer Foods and Ringer Foods in Gridley, Illinois. He's also the founder and current president of Lifesong for Orphans, a ministry that serves over 16,000 children worldwide. I've had the opportunity to read his book, Radical Business, From Ownership to Stewardship, which we'll discuss a little bit today. Gary has become a regular visitor to Winona Lake because his daughter Leslie lives here, and he considers Linus and Winnie, two freshmen here at Grace from Zambia, to be his granddaughters. Sitting across from me, Kondo Simfukwe is in the room. Kondo is lead pastor of Mission Point Community Church here in Warsaw, where he's led the charge for the church to care for vulnerable children in unique and extravagant ways. And in case his accent doesn't give it away, Kondo was born in London, raised in Zambia, and spent high school years in Australia before coming to the United States for college. He holds a BA in Biblical Studies and a Master's of Divinity from Grace College and Seminary. While at Grace, he met and married his Lancer Hall of Fame wife, Melissa. And Kondo and Melissa have 5 children, whom I'll spend the next couple decades convincing to come to Grace. And then the last member of our esteemed group, Kearstin Criswell. Kearstin serves at Grace as the Director of Student Involvement. She's been involved with student life here at Grace for 10 years, and during that time earned a master's degree at Grace. In her role, she designs leadership opportunities and activities for students. Kearstin brings a unique perspective to this panel as someone who's actively involved with foster care. She's been a foster mom to many children and a voice for those without one. So after that very extended introduction, welcome everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, appreciate you guys being here and having this really important conversation about different ways that we should care for the vulnerable child. And I appreciate you being willing to lend your voices to that. Gary, I'm going to start with you since you sat down closest to me. So you literally wrote the book on the topic. So we have to start with the guy who wrote the book. Tell us just a little bit about Lifesong for Orphans and how that even got started and why it got started.
Yeah, it got started because God broke me. Wasn't my plan. Early on, when I was just getting out of college, I went to work for my dad. And I did that because I didn't know what else to do. But I found that I liked business, and his was a feed business. And in my early 30s, I started a food business. And we called the feed business Ringer Feeds, and we called the food business Ringer Foods. So we weren't real original with the names. But as I started that, I was thinking the food business had so much more potential. So I told my dear wife, Marla, that we're going to get rich and I'm going to retire at 40. That's our American dream. And as we started that, though, the feed business was doing fine, but the food business was losing money month after month. And I was realizing that, if I make pig food wrong, I might kill a pig, and if I made people food wrong, I might kill a person, and that started just freaking me out, food safety, and I realized I didn't know anything about it. So I got into this pattern, Drew, night after night. Roughly 1 o'clock in the morning, I would wake up in a cold sweat, and I could feel my heart beating in my head, and I would lay there thinking all kinds of dark thoughts like, God forbid we're going to kill somebody, and then, because it happened night after night, I got, in general, sleep deprived, and then I became depressed and desperate, and I didn't care about the American dream. I mean, I cried a lot. I had even thoughts of suicide. I was never tempted to commit suicide because of my fear of God. But I was a mess, And I started just thinking about quitting, but as I'm crying out to the Father in the middle of the night, I'm thinking I just couldn't get a peace about quitting, and I felt God changing my paradigm on business, and that led to a written contract. It was just on a piece of paper that said, God, if you bless Ringer Foods and we ever sell it, we'll pay ourselves back what we invested in it, and we'll get 8% interest, but anything over and above that will be used for ministry. And then that contract became life-changing for me, led to a special prayer life that I hadn't experienced because it was more of a partnership with God. And then when we sold it in 2002, again, we're praying about what to do, and God led us to focus on helping adoptive parents pay for the cost of adoption because it's expensive.
So why that? Why there are so many needs in this world,
right?
And we live in a broken world. Why helping families adopt kids? Why did that become the focus?
Yeah. So first of all, I had learned through the journey on just this daily prayer, asking God what to do. So we basically just lifted it up to God. What are we supposed to do? And a mentor of mine said, Gary, I said, what do we do with this money that's not ours? And he said, don't just give it away. Be focused and involved. And so we started this daily prayer. Marla and I did, what should we focus on? And one of the data points that we had, it was prayer, it was conversations with numerous people, but one of them was remembering back to years before. In our church, we have a tradition that we sit around the table, and there's like 300 people in our church, and we'd sit around and have lunch together. And so she was sitting with Marie, who was younger. This was after the Ringer Foods had become successful, but years before. And Marie and Darren were adopting a little boy, but they were struggling with the money. And so Marla came back, and she's very demonstrative, and she said, Gary, that's just not right. They shouldn't have to borrow a lot of money to adopt. So we helped them, and then we had the privilege of just watching that little boy grow up until they moved away, and we watched them. That little boy grew up, and we knew that they were doing it, but we had a small part in it, and we were really blessed. So that was what we decided to do. We wanted to help other people the way we'd help Darren and Marie.
Mm-hmm. So that was how Lifesong for Orphans started, and it's expanded to become so many other things, including work in other countries, Ukraine, Haiti, Uganda,
right.
And Zambia. And now we have 2 young ladies here starting at Grace as freshmen from Zambia. So tell us a little bit specifically about what's going on in Zambia and how that led Linus and Winnie to Grace College.
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer your question, but I want to first tell you something that is exciting to us. So Marla and I started this adoption ministry, and we never adopted ourselves. But we have 15 grandkids now, and 9 of them are adopted.
Wow.
And 2 of them aren't really adopted, but they're Linus and Winnie. And Leslie, our daughter, who is not married, but she was a missionary to our project over there, and then she brought Linus and Winnie back here on a student visa, and they call her Auntie Leslie, and they call Marla and me Grandpa and Grandma. So, but what we do over there, all of the projects, we're actually involved in 13 countries now, and almost, I think without exception, every one of them came to us, and we basically responded. What happened in Zambia, a pastor over there had a vision of starting a school, and also, just helping the kids. So it is a school project. We serve a community that is very poor. They call it the compound, and these kids come, and it has evolved through the years. There's roughly 25, 30 kids in the class, and now our kid and goes through high school. Then they go into what we call student life homes, and that is what is happening. So then they actually do live with us. Once they get out, Lifesong has this 4-part pledge that we call a pledge, but I always like to say that sounds like it's more than it is, because it's just something we're working at. And by the grace of God, it's something that happens naturally if a child is adopted. But in a situation like this where you got 25 kids in the class, it's something that we're working to by the grace of God. And that 4-part pledge is, number one, that we take care of their physical needs. Number two, that we give them a good education. Number three, that we disciple them in Christ. And that number four, as they age out, we want them to land well. Well, how do you land well in a country that is 70 to 80% unemployed? So, I'm a business guy, and so we're focusing, and we've got ideas, but there's one particular project that we're really developing there, and it's called Lifesong Farms, and we're doing that in Ukraine, and we're doing it now in Zambia, and Lord willing, we'll be doing it in Uganda, but it's a project that is pretty high-tech hydroponics, and it is something that we believe in the course of the next several years that will be paying for a substantial part of the cost of the ministry, but also giving our kids jobs.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing just a little bit of the background, and it's neat to see how your mission has expanded from being narrowly focused to adoption to really caring for kids all over the globe.
Yeah, and I'll just say one last thing. I mean, what hit me when we were first focused strictly on adoption, and to put it in perspective, I mean, there is roughly 100,000 a year, and it's not exact, but somewhere in that range, but at that point, years ago, roughly adoptions in the U.S. And at that point, years ago, it was close to 30,000 were international, and that has the number of adoptions has stayed about the same, but international adoptions are much less now. But there's 150 million orphans. And so when I first got started, I knew in general about adoption, but once I realized there's 150 million orphans, how are we going to do that? And there's such an opportunity with kids because the Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he grows up, he won't depart from it. So there's tremendous opportunity there to make a difference by God's grace.
Kondo, you've been connected to Gary and even connected to Lifesong for a while. How did you get connected? And then sort of how has being involved with Lifesong affected you?
Yeah, I mean, Gary mentioned his daughter Leslie lives around here. And so when she first moved to the area, I think she tracked me down just by virtue of the fact that there's somebody from Zambia. So she came to the office, and I mean, no offense, but oftentimes people have never heard of Zambia, let alone know where Zambia is, let alone have lived in Zambia. Right? Yeah. So, man, it was so good to meet her. I didn't know anything about Lifesong at that point. And so, man, we met, we started to talk, we knew similar places. She had lived in the Kitwe, Ghanaton area, which is where the school is. And so we started to connect. She told me about her connection and Lifesong for Orphans, which was this ministry that her dad and mom had, played a role in, bringing to life. So that was my initial connection, and there was just so much getting to know bits and pieces. And I think maybe some months later, Gary was in town, and we figured out a way to connect. And some of it was if you meet Leslie and you meet, any of his kids, frankly, who are bought into this vision, heart, and soul, and they're taking ridiculous risks and doing things that I'm like, do you know that there is a really self-absorbed version of life you could be pursuing versus this meaningful version you're going after? I'm the kind of person who's like, I want to meet your parents. Like, I'm keen to meet, your folks. So when I had the opportunity to sit down with Gary, I was thrilled to do that. And let me just say this, because this is always something I think about. Months later, I had another meeting with Leslie. I'd met Gary at that point. I'd known Leslie at this point maybe for a year. I don't think I had a clue how influential this ministry is. It is. I went to one of their retreats, then I went to the Christian Alliance for Orphans, this massive gathering of folks from around the world. And that's when it occurred to me, like, wait a minute, I didn't realize Lifesong did all this so that its tentacles reach that far, because there's just this understated, we're just trying to help, we're just trying to make it, don't believe it. Like, it's, the Lord has blessed this movement. And I love saying this because if Gary knew I was going to say this, he would be really upset and say, don't talk about that. But it's pretty amazing. So anyway, we connected, and I just, being somebody who understands the plight of, the common Zambian, and to sit face to face with a man who was playing part in a ministry that was literally changing the trajectory of lives. And there were 2 of these kids living in our community now, because this is not just something talked about, it's something lived out. My heart just immediately bored in. I just first bored in because you're making a difference in a country that's close to me. And then my heart bored in when I realized, no, you're making a difference in so many countries, in the lives of so many people. And I don't know how much more subscribed I could be to Lifesong, who they are, what they're about. And it's just, to me, it's just a stirring movement. And then it also just resonated with who we were as a church, and what we were after. So it's truly been a privilege.
Yeah. Can I just interject something?
Yes.
Though? When Leslie was praying about bringing over those 2 girls, part of the journey was knowing about you. So, sorry for getting emotional, but Marlon and me just this morning were saying, we got together with the girls, and as they left, I thought, we are so blessed. So, again, excuse for the emotional, but thanks, Kondo. You were part of that journey.
Man.
And to make it come full circle, we have Kearstin here, who's now going to have the opportunity to build into their lives as members of the Grace College student community, which is really neat to see how each of you have had an effect on 2 lives, much less countless many others that would have ended up elsewhere, if not for what God had called you to do and your willingness to say yes. Kondo, thank you for sharing. Kondo, one of the, you can't go to Mission Point for more than a couple weeks without you talking about that 150 million orphan number and putting that in front of your congregation as a challenge. Tell me where that heart came from, even in the birthing of Mission Point Community Church.
Yeah, I wish I could say we were a church movement that just really was built around a deep concern, particularly for the vulnerable child. That came over time. But what was true is when Mission Point launched, there were some key questions that we were asking as a church. If Jesus were here physically, where would he be? Who would he hang out with? Who would he serve? What kind of people would he focus his energies on? And we felt like, man, biblically, there were some evidences that pointed us in a certain direction. And then it's also something that occurred to us that, when Jesus returns, he's not going to give us a pop quiz. He's actually given us the cheat sheet. He's given us the questions ahead of time. And when I return, I will ask you certain questions. I'll ask you, what did you do with this vulnerable population, or this vulnerable population, or this vulnerable population? Because whatever you do for the least of these, that you do for me. So for us as a church, a big question was, so when the Lord comes back, what do we want him to catch us red-handed doing? What do we want him to find us in the midst of doing? And we couldn't escape at least the fact that it was an invitation and a calling to be loving on and serving the hurting, the broken, the vulnerable, wherever we found them. So that was true about the church's DNA from the beginning. And we just talked about that a lot. And as we did that, I think we just started to notice that families started to take that seriously, and it landed them in adoption or foster care, because it became very clear to us there are a lot of vulnerable populations around the world, but none as vulnerable as the child. And so I think that's something that started to happen over time. So it started with a couple of families who adopted, and then foster care, and then the Lord just seemed to swell that heartbeat. We, the Simfukwes, as a family, just applauded that until our lives got upended and interrupted, and the Lord said, "You're now going to, take steps to adopt." And I just think because of the privileged position we had in the church, it was just a constant question: how's the adoption coming? And it was something we were talking about all the time. And so I think that also played a part in it. And man, folks bought in. I think of Kearstin and some of the things that Kearstin has done, and then we started to figure out, oh man, what does it look like for us to support families who are in the process of caring for the vulnerable child? So ministries got launched in the church. And so it just really, this heartbeat infiltrated and started to focus around the vulnerable child. Now, if you go to Mission Point, you notice the vulnerable child is not the only vulnerable population we talk about, but it is definitely the primary population we focus around. And I think it just happened by asking what kind of church we wanted to be, and we wanted to pass the final exam, and so we wanted to really study up on the questions we knew Jesus would ask us.
What does that look like very practically? If a pastor said, "Wow, we want to do something like that at our church." I mean, what are the specific ministries that you have going, or things that you have done to support families?
Well, man, there are a number of different things. Some of them have taken on a more organic tone. Some of them have been much more organized. We have a ministry called One Such Child, and One Such Child is very focused on just being a community that supports individuals and families who are in the journey, anywhere along the journey with the vulnerable child. And the question is, how can we come alongside and support you and resource you and encourage you? And that has become almost, people would come from 100 miles away to be a part of a resourcing experience there, or an encouraging experience there. So I think having a ministry that is centered around what matters to us, I think validates, but it also brings out of, I think there was a time when I grew up in the church where foster care or adoption were relegated to very quiet corners. It was the occasional thing, and each family was kind of, you're on your own, which was what Gary was describing about Marla's heart, that said, wait a minute, this family seems to be journeying alone and figuring things out alone and borrowing. No, we got to figure out how to come alongside them. So I think having a ministry like that really just, I think, validates and helps people believe there's a whole number of us who are thinking about this, and there are a number of us who are scared, and there are a number of us who feel under-resourced. And so I think that just gives visibility and validation to the ministry. But it's moved into our children's ministry as well, where there's just a great question about, so when kids come home, what does it look like not to just act like all kids are, the same, from the same backgrounds, from the same experiences. No, there's special considerations to be had for certain kids. And so we have a ministry called MP Inc., Mission Point, and it's inclusion. We want to make sure that these kids are a part of the church. So we have somebody who's hired to focus on that. So I just think putting resources and community around those things matter a lot. I'll say one more quick thing, especially if I were talking to pastors. And I know this is a heartbeat for Kearstin, and it's definitely a heartbeat for us. The idea that caring for the vulnerable child is this unique calling reserved for a very specific and special person. We've done that with evangelism. Like, I would share the gospel, but I'm not gifted and I'm not called. I think that's ultimately debunked by the leadership. And so we have to communicate that as it's a biblical mandate. It's not something that's unique for certain folks. So I do think another thing that's true for us, like, man, any excuse we have, whether it's Orphan Sunday, Stand Sunday, or whatever it is, we want to talk about it. And then throughout the year, we are constantly highlighting from the front. Because I think to have ministries in the background that speak of the value of this, and then up front is just silence, does not help to perpetuate the heartbeat of God. So for us, in every area, we are figuring out how do we talk about this and bring it to the forefront.
You mentioned that your family has recently brought 3 girls home, and you were preaching this from stage and encouraging others and doing things to care for orphans, and then God called you to adopt yourselves. What changed about your perspective, or what did you learn from now going through the process yourself, and going through from A to Z, and yours was a long process, to go after those girls and bring them to your home?
Man, yeah, it was a funky process. I mean, the way the Lord invited us into it. Yeah,
every foster care is it's
yeah. So that was for us maybe a little bit of a reprimand, in that there was an openness in us, like a great willingness, like almost the Isaiah, "Here I am, Lord, send me." I'm willing to go. And he took us up on it, because I think sometimes you can say that and almost get away with having this offer, but he took us up on it. And yeah, it was a long process, 4 years plus, I mean, of waiting and paperwork and waiting and paperwork and but the Lord provided immensely. So we learned a number of key things. One of them was, man, if he invites you into this, which I think in some sense or another, he invites us all into it.
Right.
His provision will be, it'll be made known as we take those steps forward, as we say yes and step into those risky places. And we did, and he provided immensely. And it's interesting because he shocked us in the way he provided for us. And I know that's not the story for everyone. And Gary, no less than 3 times, asked me, "What can Lifesong do for you?" And the Lord had provided for us. So we knew, obviously, the generosity of Lifesong would benefit many others, as it has many in our church who are going through that process. But so, yeah, I mean, the Lord's provision for folks who I know, we were like, how are we going to do this? And the Lord just provided incredibly. But the big thing I know we learned is I'm a pretty independent person. I don't like to need a lot of people. It's amazing how much this process taught us, man, we need each other. It takes a village. the world in which we all used to just say yes to God quietly and try and figure it out and wrestle behind closed doors. We need each other immensely. That we've learned. It's been really, really difficult. It's been this beautiful adventure. It's been, man, we've seen, the Lord in different lights. We've learned the monstrous parts of our hearts that we didn't, weren't fully aware. Like, was I always a monster? Or is this new? No, it was just lots been revealed in us. But the whole community piece, the way our church has come around us, has been, we've led the church more than we've ever needed the church. And adoption, just like, oh my goodness, no, we're actually a key part of the church, and we need the church and we need the community that's come around us. And I'm so glad to be part of a movement that surrounds well. And again, ministries like Lifesong, which come alongside well, has been, just a beautiful thing
That's awesome
to watch as well.
Kearstin, you attend Mission Point, so you've been there, a part of this movement, and eventually God called you to step out of your comfort zone and do something radical. Tell us a little bit about your journey to fostering.
So I've never really, at the time, I had not really considered foster care. I didn't know anyone that fostered. I really didn't know anything except for what TV portrays, which is not the best. So I discouraged that. But actually, our missions coordinator at the time at Mission Point realized one of the barriers to being certified as a licensed parent, like a parent, was that all the training was really far away. And so she and the church leadership decided we need to eliminate any barriers. How can we host this through our church? So that elimination of barriers to me was caused me to think, why not? Why wouldn't I do this? So I don't know that I remember being called. I just remember thinking, they're inviting me to something that I know is true in Scripture for all of us. I have extra space in my home, and I will use it in some way. I have extra money in my funds. I can reprioritize in order to do something. I have time to give. Being a single woman, there are things that I have extra of that I want to be towards something the Lord cares about, not just something that I would care about. And so for me, it was like a why not? I'm not sure that I'm someone who you would see me interacting in our kids' point, because I'm not that person that's like, oh my gosh, kids. But I can feel a need and I can see hurt. And I knew that it was more of a why not. Even once I was licensed, I had no idea what I was getting into, but I knew I wanted to be into it. But I also felt really committed that I was doing that with people behind me in a church that was seeking to kind of assist in some ways.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so true. It's somebody can look at it and go, what is she thinking? This is gonna be way too hard. And the answer is, yep, it's going to be really, really hard. But that is what God calls us to, and He's not going to call us to anything He didn't do many times over, whatever we shall do. So tell us a little bit about your journey. What have you learned, and what's been some of the exciting things that you've discovered about God or discovered about the process of fostering?
Yeah, well, I just counted the other day because I was getting ready to introduce myself to my my first year class and tell them who I was, some of my background. And I realized in the year and a half I've been licensed, I've had 13 kids in my home.
Wow.
So there are 4 of those kids that have been longer placements, but sometimes it's just an emergency placement. Or doing respite for another foster parent who just needs a break or is going on vacation. That blew me away and got me really excited to know, what will I say in a year? I can't wait to know what that number is. Because it is something that I started and I did, but I had no idea how much it was the Lord's heartbeat. I had no idea the power of love until I fostered. And to see how that can transform a child who may have not felt love, whether provisionally or through words of affirmation. And so I have seen how that power in speaking life into a child, just like the Lord speaks life into us in His very nature and creation of us, is really, really powerful. I've learned that the kids that come into my home through foster care, oftentimes they've been through trauma, and a child with trauma just cannot be parented like other kids. And that takes so much intentionality. And it has brought out in me an advocate. Like, I am now a fierce advocate for every child that comes into my home, because they have each have needs. And it is my responsibility to take those to the appropriate people, to communicate to DCS about that, to talk to Mission Point about that when I bring a child in, to meet with the teachers in our school system, and to realize, here's this child that I have to steward, and I need to be a team with you. Because in order for him or her to heal, we need to be in this together, and it's not going to look like how we might think with another child. So they might have one of the kids I had a lot of anger issues, and it was really hard. I mean, physically, I was having to restrain him a lot, broke a window. I have some scars. But what I love about that, and what I love about Jesus, is when I can see into that child and know it's a bigger picture than that, and how intimately I can know him and still love him in that. It is like a gift. It's like something I hope is contagious. And I think it helps me know more and more of who God is to me. I remember one night, that same kid I was talking about, I was scratching his back and telling him the story of the Red Sea. And he said something like, I am so sorry I was so mean to you today. I'm sorry I was angry. And I said, Bud, I know you are. He's like, I want to change, but I just don't know how. He's processing his little feelings. And I said, can I just make sure you know something? He's like, what? I said, no matter what, if you wake up and we have these issues tomorrow, you're still welcome to be in this home. And we might have to work through some things, but I am for you. And I'm going to love even this mess that you have, because that's the mess that God's committed to me in my life. He's like, I know you would. I know you still love me. And it just hit me like that. That could be communicated to a small child, and that is a love that God continues to give us over and over and over again. So I don't say those things to brag on myself that, I'm just doing all these great things, but it's like in doing something that is natural when you're empowered by the Holy Spirit, just teaches you more about who God is. And I've said to several people, like, I never want to get out of foster care unless there's something else, because it's the first thing I have ever done where I'm living for something that's not me. Like, me, Kearstin, would be traveling once a month, like a lot. I would be doing a lot of different things. But in choosing to sacrifice for these kids, so why would I do anything else? Like, the intimacy the Lord provides in it, and just this recognition of it's not about all I've seen in the world, but it's about each person I run into, knowing that there's a God who loves them through me in some way, is like, why would I not do that? So why not?
And I think you said it so beautifully, just that no one is ever too far gone for God, for him to rescue them. And that's how he calls us to care for others. And no one is ever too far gone to be loved and cared for and shown the love Jesus has shown us. That's amazing. So you have a day job too, at Grace with students, caring for them as well. And how have these two worlds meshed, collided, with your day job at Grace and then being foster mom as well?
Yeah. What's interesting is I think we've each talked about something different that reminds me about, like, the love of Jesus is contagious. And I feel like there's this tension that we have as Christians to not be arrogant, but to be humble. But there's still this, like, if we're to boast of anything, it is the Lord. And so I have tried to navigate working here at Grace and with the students to know, for the first couple of years, this is how you live as a single Christian. Like, you steward that singleness. You do not victimize yourself. That's something that I think being at Mission Point has it's transformed who I am and how I steward my life. So I have been intentional to kind of broadcast that belief that I have and empowerment to the students. So it was just the same when I started fostering, where I think the fostering was, I'm going to keep stewarding. What else can I steward? And it was my time and my money and my home and those things. And so it has been so fun to be with my students, to share with them what's going on, but for them to come up with ways they want to serve me. And so to have them offer, hey, if you ever need someone just to pick up a child or to drop them off somewhere, would you let us know, or just hang out with them a few hours? I think every child that I've had in my home, for at least like 6 months, so that's a total of 4, has had a mentor or 2 that were a Grace student who just randomly would pick them up, play disc golf with them, go and have, coffee, whatever that might be for, these small kids, but who love them and who don't have to love them. But also I think it's been really, though it's hard, a vulnerable and good experience for them to see the mourning that I do before the Lord. Even today, I'm starting to wrestle with the placement I have now and I love dearly. There is an end in sight where they'll be reunified. And I'm so excited about that. But I am breaking inside. And I was going to a meeting with some of the students, and I just said, I'm going to just warn you that I'm really having some hard feelings right now, and I'm starting to mourn. And I'm telling you because I may be distracted by it, but I also want you to know the real me, and that I can't cover it up or I'm not going to authentically lead you. And I just kind of saw them turn their heads at me. And I think that's been the beauty, is there are some highs in this fostering journey. There are some lows and a lot of lows. But for them to see me bring that forward, I don't do that because I want them to think I'm awesome or anything, but do this too. We're going to have times when we are hurting for the Lord, that we are sacrificing, and that is the purpose of community. So I have an awesome community of peers and older, but I would say my community are also the college students. And I am not afraid to ask for their help because I want them to keep practicing that from now until forevermore. So it's fun to share with them. They love coming to play basketball and just hang out, offer to cook or clean, and I'm never going to say no to those things. So it's definitely a double gift. Yeah. I think that the children in my home receive, but also that I receive.
We often talk about that students at Grace are going to receive great content in the classroom, and it's going to be biblical integration, and those are fantastic things. But I think we also talk about how students are going to be a part of a community and a family. And that's one of the benefits of being Christ-centered and being small and having robust student life programming, people that they can do life with and see what life can look like when it's lived for Jesus. And, that's as good a lesson as any they're going to live in the classroom, is just to watch you and walk alongside of you in your journey of caring for others. So thank you for doing that. And Kondo, I want to ask you, as somebody who's been preaching this message and setting up programs for this to happen in your church, and then you sit next to somebody who shares like that, who has caught the vision and implemented it in amazing ways. What's that do for you?
Man, yeah. I mean, beyond humbling. And also, it would be crazy for me not to say, man, Kearstin has had a willingness to say yes to what the Lord stirs in her since. That's one of the first things I learned about her. And so, for me, it's been such a humbling thing because I'm a recipient of Kearstin's generosity, her offering to come alongside and serve our family and to love on our kids and to, take them for, picnics in the rain in the park or whatever else it is. And so, it for me it's a sobering thing. And it's just, to me, again, the reminder of, we can't do everything. That's something I know is said often in these circles, but we can all do something. And the question is, what's the something that, that can be done? But this, to me, is one of the most humbling stories. Because again, Kearstin said it, I'm single, listen, I have other priorities, and my priority is to get out of this world called singleness and to, because life begins when you're in a relationship. And just some of those lies whispered that Kearstin's life is continuing to defy, and she continues to say yes, and lives continue to be changed and marked. And then, you get this movement of folks who are saying, like, are you for real? Like, how explain this? Because this is so strange. This goes completely counterintuitive, directions from everything else that we hear. But it does, for me, it inspires me as somebody in the seat I get to sit in to continue to talk about the gospel, really, the gospel of a God who comes after vulnerable people, of vulnerable humanity, and at great sacrifice and cost to himself includes us in his family and affirms us over and over again. You may break a window, you may sin, you may mess up, but you're going to be part of this family. You're not going anywhere. I'm for you, and we get to be reflections of that. We get to be visible illustrations of the God he is. This inspires me to say yes more. It inspires me to continue to, to talk about this more. And frankly, Kearstin, it inspires me to be like, I complain a lot about some of the hardships I go through, and it's good to like, wait, they literally broke a window?
Two of them, actually.
2 windows. We've not had a broken window yet. So, and so it's just another reminder that it is hard, and none of us would say otherwise, and I love that the three of us get to share about this, but Drew, you're an adoptive dad, and so you've been in this journey of waiting and the disappointment and things fall through, and it's crazy that the 4 of us are sitting around this table talking about something that we acknowledge, like, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Let's do it again. Let's do it more, because somehow this is the adventure we were created for, and the adventure we've been called into. But yeah, Kearstin inspires me.
I think what you say is so important, though. Like that, this is why I want to instill in my students in the circles and around. What is it that's costing us? Like, there should be something in our lives. I think you were kind of reflecting on that in doing this, there's something that's costing us. It's inconveniencing us. And I think as a Christian, we should be able to say, this is what it is. To be able for Kondo to ask me, what's costing you today? Like, what ways are you being depleted in order to sacrifice for Jesus? I feel like I would love to see the church and just more of us asking those questions, because there's something. And we just got to start figuring out what it is, or just do something, and that'll be the thing it's supposed to be. And so I love that, like, what's costing us.
Yeah, what I was going to say when I hear your story, Kearstin, there was a adoptive family that we got to learn about and know early on, and we've met so many neat people. But he said, James 1:27, pure religion is taking care of orphans and widows. But he said that's not a commandment; it's a definition. And so, if you want to experience If you want to experience
Amen.
God, if you want to experience pure religion, drink it in, then take care of orphans. Not a commandment. And also, so you're really experiencing that. You're experiencing pure religion. But the other thought I had is I've kind of like Tales of Narnia. I don't know if you know that,
Sure.
where Aslan's
Sure.
the god and he's the lion. But at one point early on, there's a point where the little boy and girl who are in this adventure, and they're talking to the beaver, and they're hearing about this Aslan, and they're saying, "Is he safe?" And the beaver says, "Safe? No, he's not safe, but he is good." And that is what the way it is. It is hard.
Yeah.
And I had this Pollyanna view of adoption, and that is gone the day after being in this, for 17 and 18 years, whatever it is. Even though we haven't done it, we're basically with a young man that I learned to mentor, and now is spending his senior year with us. And me and Marla were just talking today. This is not easy, but yet we'll probably be calling you to get some advice.
What's neat to be around this table is it's different, right? It's not It's not the same. And what I appreciate about all of you is you're not holding yourself up as like some heroes. And I think sometimes, we look at those who have stepped into hard things and gone into foster and adoption and traveled the world trying to take care of at least some portion of 150 million orphans. And oh man, you are such a hero. You are such a good person. And all three of you quickly say, no. You're looking at the wrong person. Look a little bit higher. Check out my Savior. And when you give of yourself and you deplete that energy, the joy that comes in return is greater than what you had before. And isn't that the economy of our God? And how awesome is it to be a small part of that? And I appreciate how each of you have done that in one way, shape, or another. So one question I want to ask as we start to wrap up here is, somebody is really intrigued because we were able to just give like a very little bit of each of your stories and each of the arenas in which you live out that story. Somebody's interested in connecting with you or connecting with your organizations. How could they do that? And Gary, I'll start with you.
Yeah, just feel free to look up Lifesong on the web, or also if you want to write to me, it's just simply Gary@lifesong.org.
Thank you. Kondo?
Same, not lifesong.org, but
go to Lifesong.
Yeah, but I could not more strongly encourage you to do that. However, missionpoint.net is our website. If you're ever in the Warsaw area, I would invite you to come on and join the adventure with us. Be part of this adventure. And yet I would also say, if somebody is engaging this and they're part of a church community somewhere else, I cannot encourage enough, like Kearstin said, to be an advocate, to go and talk to your leadership about maybe how you can be part of a spark to start a conversation. And hey, I'm just APB call outs to anyone who's interested in, foster care, anyone who's interested in adoption. Can we just get together and start to pray? So, of course, would love you to be a part of Mission Point Community Church, but we realize the church is bigger than our little corner of it. And wherever, you happen to connect with church, I would say connect with the heart of God and figure out others who are. I can assure you of this, and this is the last thing I'll say. I can assure you of this. Whatever church exists on the planet, there is a remnant in that church who is wrestling through orphan care or is wrestling through foster care or adoption or serving the vulnerable child. And part of that is because there's a remnant in that church who's reading the Bible. And you can't avoid it. And so to me, no, sometimes it just takes one person to say, hey, if you're thinking about this, can we get together? We don't know what's going to happen, but can we at least start getting together and let's explore, lifesong.org. You will not be able to, because we could do this, there's this option, there's this, and could not encourage it enough. But if you're in Warsaw, come to Mission Point.
That's awesome. Kearstin, way to connect with you if somebody has question or interest in fostering.
They should just get a hold of you, and you can send them to me.
There you go.
But I can always take an email through Kearstin.Criswell@grace.edu. I love talking about this, and I do think it is contagious, and there's a part for everyone to play. There is a part for everyone to play, even if it's educating your 5-year-old on what to do when you have a kid that acts or looks different than you. I would also say, though, connecting, I think the church should be leading the way and understanding their community. And 2 ways to do that would be to sit down with someone from their local DCS and say, what is the reality? Like, just tell me what is going on. What is the need for foster parents, but what are the needs to support foster parents because they need a lot of support?
And DCS, some of us may not even know.
Department of Child Services, also known as CPS, Child Protective Services in some communities. Every county has one. I would also say to meet with someone from a local school. I know that in Warsaw, I can go. I've had the opportunity to meet with a couple of principals, and they will tell you they know the students that are on the brink of a family member not being able to take care of them, or that aren't getting enough support at home. A part of our my belief, and hopefully several others, would be like, how do we stop kids from going into foster care? So how do we come around families that are like in danger of that? And I feel very strongly that any principal or guidance counselor could tell you names of those students or needs that those students have, and we can find ways to step in as the church for that too.
Thank you. I feel like I could just sit here for hours and soak in wisdom from each of you, and I so appreciate you taking the time, making the drive to be a part of this conversation. And as Kondo prayed even before we got started here, I mean, if one kid's life was impacted just a little bit by the love of God through a conversation like this, it's all worth it. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. And thank you to all of those who listened to the Grace Story podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time, and if you'd be so willing to go wherever you found it and check it out and rate it and then share it with others, we'd be so appreciative. Thank you to Dr. Wally Brath, Associate Professor of Worship Arts, for providing the music, and for Rick Neer and Andrew Palladino, our executive producers, for putting this together for us today. And wherever you are and however you're doing, we pray that you would live your best grace story today.